Uh, but we're living at a very interesting time. I saw that my friend Joe Schimmel did a teaching this week from Blessed Hope Chapel, and it was titled the Maskilim. Now, I've done a number of talks about the Maskilim, and this is sort of what I talk about every Sunday, that at the end of time, there probably have always been these people throughout the history of Israel and through church history, these people who study and understand. In Daniel 11, it says they'll understand and they'll do great exploits. And so I think we live at that time. In fact, and so you could go look up Blessed Hope Chapel and Joe Schimmel and pick up that sermon. And again, if you look for Maskilim, Maskilim, in my name, you'll probably get one of the teachings that I've done on it, I think. I don't know if they're online or not, but I remember I did something at Rock Harbor Church probably 8 or 9 years ago on the subject. But one of the things that's interesting is that, and we talk about this fact that at the end, there will be wise who understand and instruct many. And I think there's a relationship between this verse and what we see with the 7 churches in Revelation chapters 2 and 3, because it talks about he that overcomes. And so I think there's a connection between the faithfulness and being in the Word that leads to the Maskilim and the overcomers in Revelation 2 or 3. But I'm not dogmatic on that. And again, I think we're living at this time where are we exactly? And we're seeing a lot of things that may be indicating that the horses of Revelation are ready to ride. Some think they're already riding. And again, I think it's one of these things where we just need to be in the Word and studying to understand exactly what's going on, because I think we're seeing some things. I will tell you that each week I go to sit down to prepare this, and I have great expectations about being succinct and direct and organized. And I get to about, I usually get up at 2 or 3 a.m. on Sunday morning, and I get to about 5 a.m. on Sunday morning, and I'm like, I'll just try to kind of make it organized as I go, because it's very, very difficult to put together and read the information, particularly the things that we've seen this week. So, and I see right now it deleted some slides, and now they're in here again. Okay, let's see what this is. Well, I mentioned this a little bit last Sunday because we sort of saw that, and I may jump into this first because it's pretty important. This was a lady, pregnant, expecting, on the way to the hospital to deliver a baby, and she was murdered in Israel, and her funeral was last week. And these things have kind of a big impact on the psyche of people in Israel, and you should pray for them. I mean, I think talking to a good friend there, chatting with him in text the other day, and I usually text, and then he'll send me an audio message, and but one of the things that people in Israel are telling me is that it's very difficult psychologically for people. Like every Sunday, it happened again this morning, every Sunday morning, which is the start of the work week in Israel, there's a Houthi missile attack. Everybody has to run to the shelters. Now, some people, they just don't pay attention to them anymore because it seems like nothing happens, but it's still this constant drag. The sirens go off, people hear booms, and usually nothing happens. But there is a huge impact. There's an impact economically that like most European airlines now have canceled flights into Israel for the foreseeable future. I think Air Canada I don't think they're going to start resuming flights until September or October. British Airways is suspended for a while. Delta did restore service in the past week. So it's a difficult situation because the Houthis are aiming things at Ben Gurion Airport, and airlines tend to not want to fly into airports where their planes might get hit by a missile. Can you imagine? Even though the chances are pretty slim that will happen. So this is an interesting article from Jerusalem Post, and you're going to see this big push over the next couple of weeks. By the way, if you think there's been a lot of things happening, if you follow this and you try to make sense of it, if you think a lot of things have been happening with regard to Israel and the Middle East in the recent weeks, just wait for the next 3 weeks. 3 weeks to a month. It's going to be a lot of things happening. And so you're going to see these people, they're going to be calling like peace with the entire Middle East. Look at what the opening paragraphs of this is from the Jerusalem Post last week by Daniel Rosen. In recent months, the Middle East has felt like a page-turning novel with what lies ahead on the next page unknown. Alliances, threats, and declarations have been changing with dizzying speed. From Gaza and Tehran to Riyadh and Doha, from Washington to Jerusalem, the headlines come fast and furious. But underneath the noise, and sometimes hidden from the general public, a larger, more connected strategy is emerging, a potential realignment of the Middle East, one in which Israel's security may be quietly benefiting from what seems on the surface like an American contradiction. On the surface, an anxiety-ridden scene unfolds where it is hard to interpret the age-old question, is this good or bad for the Jews? And so what you see is people are analyzing all these things, what Trump is doing, what other people are doing, Trump's trips, his envoys. You'll see a very mixed response. Some people will say, Trump is just doing such a great job. He's playing 4D chess and he's 20 moves ahead of everybody else. People hold to that view. I don't, by the way. I'm very troubled, as I mentioned last week, by what I see happening. It's like everywhere you look, there's turmoil. I'll mention some things about China this week. I'll mention some things about Russia, Ukraine. And, the hope was, and I think President Trump's goal was, that we'd have peace and security and prosperity all over the globe. That hasn't happened. I don't think we're any closer to anything in Russia and Ukraine. And before I forget about it, because I don't have a slide on it, one person I follow on Telegram is a guy named Alexander Dugin. I've talked about him. There were articles, probably 10 years ago, writing about the fact, calling him Putin's Rasputin. That he's kind of a mystical, geopolitical, Russian mysticism, Russian Orthodox, Eurasian guy. He thinks Eurasia should run the world with Russia at the head. Now, everybody disputes how much influence he has over Putin, but he does seem to have a lot of influence. So I think their relationship probably goes up and down. But this week he was saying, so we heard a lot of things this week. Trump was saying, we're going to have peace with Ukraine, working out a deal, we're going to get it done. And remember, he said, I'll have it done in, I believe he did say, 24 hours after he takes office, there's going to be peace between Russia and Ukraine. But Dugin made some very interesting comments this week. And there was supposed to be a meeting in Istanbul last week. Zelensky showed up. Putin did not. Trump and Putin spoke the other day for a couple of hours. Nobody knows exactly what they talked about. It's one of the times there, I don't think there's been a lot of leaks to the press about what it might have been talked about. But the fact of the matter is, Russia made some massive attacks on Kyiv over the past 2 nights, hundreds of drones, dozens of ballistic missiles. Now, the one case, and I'm just going to pull some numbers out of the air, there were like 245 or 250 drones launched into Kyiv, and Ukraine says we shot down 245 of them. So do the math, 250, if that was the exact number. I think it's pretty close. That meant 5 got through. And then they say, well, there were 14 ballistic missiles and we shot down 11 of them. Or there were 40 ballistic missiles and we shot down 37 of them. Well, that means there's some getting through. The first night, there were about 15 people injured. Now, my understanding is last night, maybe a dozen people in Kyiv were killed, attacked some residential apartment buildings. But this comes in the context of everybody talking about there's going to be peace and security and there's going to be peace between Russia and Ukraine. Dugin, to the extent that he has influence, you can go to his Telegram channel. He wrote an article. It was in French, but it's with AI tools and everything. It's very easy to translate things. And essentially what Dugin said was, we're nowhere close to peace. Russia has only achieved about 50% of what it really wants to achieve in Ukraine in terms of taking over territory. So while everybody talks about, well, we'll just give them these provinces and Putin will be okay with that, according to Dugin, this could go on for a very long time. And then you see Russians and other contexts saying, hey, this has only been 2.5 years. We fought Sweden for 21 years. And so the question is, how do they keep going? And I will say I've been surprised that Ukraine has been able to hang in there that long. Russia's much bigger, more powerful, but Ukraine has developed some incredible abilities to use drones and other tools and manufacture them and cause a bit of havoc in Russia. I mean, they take it back to Russia at times too. So, but it's a meat grinder. Ukraine has right now the younger people in Ukraine, like in their early 20s, which is where we usually draw most of our military people from when they serve in a war. Ukraine has pretty much avoided that. But today I was reading an article that Zelensky and Ukraine is starting to offer incentives to younger people to join the effort because they don't have the people. Russia's run out of people. Russia goes to North Korea, they go to Syria, they go to, Wagner Group brings people in from Africa. They have this arrangement with people in Chechnya. So there's a logistical issue here in any war, and it's a big logistical issue in this war, and it's getting bigger because of the demographics. And I may talk a little bit about that later, because I talk a lot about that, and I'll be honest with you, I'm not sure exactly how this fits into end-time Bible prophecy, but I think it makes things it shortens the timeline when people are going to take actions to cement their legacy. So this is an example of what I mean about the different articles that you'll see. Trump is frustrated with Israel over suffering in Gaza. You'll see stories like this all the time. And then Trump will be asked point blank in an interview with Bret Baier, are you frustrated with Netanyahu? No, I'm not frustrated with him. He's in the middle of a war and he's got a job to do, and let him do it. But you see this constant leak of information into the press about, well, Trump is frustrated, things are not working out the right way. And there are people in Washington that, I know this may be hard to believe, there are people in Washington that may not be on board with the Trump agenda. I know it's hard to believe, it's shocking. And so people leak to the press, and there are people in the press that like to do this. I do have some comments later about the situation that we just went through with our most recent president and who was running the show. Now every day more and more comes out, and it's like he had no idea what was going on. Well, then who was running the show? And all of these people in the press, in the government, running around telling us everything is okay. How did that work out? It turned out they were all lying to us. And you wonder, like, how can they do in a time when there's such open communication about ideas and everything, how do they get away with it? Well, the answer is they're using tools against us to get away with it. Let's see. I, 'cause So about a week ago, there was a big meeting of European leaders in Albania. The head of Albania is this guy in the middle, in the front row. He's 6'7", by the way. So you can see he sort of towers over Emmanuel Macron. He really towers over Giorgia Meloni. And I like the fact that he's in a suit, and I think he's wearing tennis shoes or golf shoes. PM Heller. It's okay. So, and of course, you can see how short Zelensky is. He's even shorter than Giorgia Meloni. So everybody was there. And one of the things that came out was, okay, we need to have this big European pact. This is where the logistics that I talk about in the end times come in. Like when we talk about a revived Roman Empire coming out of Europe, it has to be empire worthy. It has to have a military. It has to have power. It has to have the ability to invade. And so right now, so this is a report. This was in the Times of London last week. And it says here, Europe would struggle to muster 25,000 troops to help in Ukraine. So the European leaders, this gaggle of people here run around, we're going to help Ukraine, we're all for Ukraine. But when push comes to shove, they say we couldn't get 25,000 people to go into Ukraine in a peacekeeping force because it's the logistics part. It's easy to talk big. And so Germany says we're going to build up our forces. And I guess that means you're going to have, 8 operational tanks by the end of next year instead of 4 or something today. Europe is pretty weak. And by the way, that may be why they're afraid of Russia, because Russia has a lot more equipment. It had much, much more 2 years ago than it does now. But by the way, it appears Russia is sort of keeping up with what they're losing, they're replacing, because they have an industrial base to work from. But, in Europe, they're having trouble keeping the power on. A week ago, they had power outages in Spain and Portugal and other places because they've gone so green. And by the way, if I've talked about this here, I apologize. I do interviews during the week, and sometimes it's always funny. Somebody says to me, well, John, you need to talk about this. I'll get these emails. And I'm like, well, I did talk about that last Sunday. Obviously, now I know you weren't paying attention. But I only respond that way after I go and check to make sure that I talked about it this Sunday, because I don't even remember what I talked about because there's so much. So I always double check first before I make that comment. And it's fine. We're not going to remember. I don't even remember everything that I talk about. But so if I repeat myself, I apologize. And now I'm talking about repeating myself about something, and I don't remember what I was going to talk about next. But we have this concept, so some hold to how these beast empires come together. Some think it's a revived Roman Empire, and they base that on Daniel chapter 9, verse 27. But I think my conclusion is it may be a misreading of that passage, but we'll see. I think we should pay attention to how these things come together. So again, I have my European centered basket, I have my Middle East centered basket, and we'll see which one is the right way. Probably we'll know after it actually takes place. So that's why I don't get too upset with people when they have a viewpoint that differs with me, unless they're really wrong. And then I do get upset with that. But so anyway, what's going on in Ukraine, it's a meat grinder. There's a lot of people dying there. It's been very, very difficult. This past week, we had a thing called the celebration of the Nakba. So Israel's birthday on our calendar is May 14th. In Israel, they celebrate it as Jerusalem Day, but it doesn't always fall on May 14th. That's when Israel declared independence. And so in the Hebrew calendar, it's sometimes different. So I believe Jerusalem Day is this week in Israel, which would be similar to what it was when we were there in 2017 for Jerusalem Day. It was later in May. And I think sometimes it even goes into June. So they don't have their calendar wrong. They just operate on a different calendar than we do. But the next day, always the day after Jerusalem Day, and usually on May 15th, the Arabs have what they call Nakba Day, the day of catastrophe. That's the day that Israel came in and expelled us. And so this is an example. This is the headline in the Tehran Times about a week ago. 77 years of resistance against Nakba. We're never going to let this happen again. The problem is that by and large, the claim that Israel expelled all the Arabs in 1948 from Israel is not true. In fact, here is a document that I came across in researching this. Is the British report on Haifa in April 1948. So Israel declares independence on May 14th, 1948. And this says, Arab leaders reiterated their determination to what? Evacuate the entire Arab population. And they did. A lot of people left because the Arab leaders said, just leave and you'll be able to come back very quickly. And by the way, almost like 99% of the Jews in Arab countries were forced out and they went to Israel. And hardly anybody talks about that. It's a amazing thing. And remember, at least my view, based on historical research, is the Palestinian Liberation Organization, referring to people, the Arabs in Israel, as Palestinians, sort of started in 1964 under Yasser Arafat, and it was essentially a Russian psychological operation. So now let's see if I can get this even more messed up and off track. So one of the things right now, so let's go through this because this will take a little while. So this is a report from Times of London yesterday or today. Israel plans Iran strike as U.S. seeks nuclear deal. And so what you see is a lot in the press which is trying to drive a wedge between the U.S. and Israel. And what's Israel going to do? Is Israel going to go ahead and strike Iran while the U.S. is trying to make a deal? And I believe, based on what I've seen, Trump really wants to do a deal with Iran. He would really like to get that resolved. And now I saw Christiane Amanpour, who is no friend of Israel, interviewing John Kerry. And John Kerry last night was saying, hey, we really want to make a deal. And it would be great for Trump to make a deal. So over at the Middle East Forum, now I'm trying to get access to all of this. The Middle East Forum in Washington, D.C. last week held a big seminar. And I would have loved to have gone, but it just wasn't possible. And they had a lot of speakers. Daniel Pipes is, I think, the director emeritus of the Middle East Forum. And he's kind of changed his positions over the years in how Israel should deal with things. And I don't know him. I remember seeing him at breakfast at the media summit every day and thinking like I need to get over there to talk to him. But then, I started talking to somebody else, and this usually happens with me. That goes way too long. So I didn't get a chance to meet him. But he had a lot of great speakers. He had Jonathan Spire, Melanie Phillips, and that type of thing. But one of the things they did, and I would love to see this play out, they had a special segment of their seminar, or I don't think it was a webinar, it was their seminar that they held, where they did a war game about what would happen if Israel strikes Iran. So I'm going to read extensively from someone who was there, who's reported on that. And so this article appeared Friday, or yesterday at the Middle East Forum. Pretty important article. So go to Middle East Forum, meforum.org, and you'll be able to find this very easily. Days, not weeks, Israel's imminent attack on Iranian nuclear sites. With the fundamental impasse on nuclear talks, Israeli officials have shifted from quiet preparation to barely concealed readiness. So listen to some of what this says. Now, they did a war game. They had a lot of experts that sat down, the Iranian side and the Israeli side and the U.S. side, and they war game it. What happens if this happens? Then what's the reaction and that sort of thing. So listen to this, because this is very interesting. And then put this into Bible prophecy, where we talk about this conflict between Israel and Persia in the end. Israel will strike Iran's nuclear facility within days. This sobering conclusion emerges from the convergence of alarming intelligence assessments, failed diplomatic efforts, and lessons from this week's Middle East Forum war game simulation. The Pentagon's Defense Intelligence Agency now warns that Tehran can produce sufficient weapons-grade uranium for a nuclear device in probably less than 1 week. From Jerusalem's perspective, this shrinking timeline leaves virtually no margin for error. And this has been something, I can take you back to reports, PowerPoints that Anthony Cordesman from CSIS did back in around 2007 or 2008, talking about what happens if a nuclear war breaks out between Iran and Israel, and Syria and Israel, and Iraq and Israel, because back in those days, that was I think that Anthony was writing about this before Syria's nuclear reactor was destroyed by Israel, and an amazing strike, as probably only Israel does in the world. So this continues. The fifth round of U.S.-Iranian nuclear talks in Rome has crystallized the impossibility of a negotiated solution. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff's departure mid-meeting on Friday, officially due to his flight schedule while technical teams remain, signals more than scheduling conflicts. The core dispute remains irreconcilable. Tehran insists on its right to enrich uranium domestically, while Washington demands zero enrichment capability. This fundamental impasse validates what we observed during the Middle East Forum's annual policy conference in Washington from May 19th to 22nd. Our war game simulation on Thursday, which brought together seasoned policy experts and Middle East Forum supporters to examine a Strait of Hormuz crisis, demonstrated how diplomatic failures can cascade into military action within hours. The Iranian team exploited every hesitation, using negotiations to advance their program while mining the strait and revealing a clandestine nuclear arsenal. Friday's diplomatic failure in Rome suggests this pattern continues in reality. So understand what I said earlier. Everything that you've seen and the overwhelming crush of news out of the Middle East and everything that really seems to be prophetically significant or related, it's been relentless over the past few weeks. I recorded a program with Tom Hughes that should play this week, and we were chatting before, and Tom says, I've never seen anything like this. I thought last week was unbelievable, and then the first 3 days of this week far exceed what happened all of last week. And I can only say I agree. So for those of us who are trying to watch these things and then boil it down and summarize it for people, it's been daunting. And what I'm telling you is, given the circumstances of what's going on there and the reality, it could really ramp up even more so in the next 2 or 3 weeks. One of them is this, and I'll talk about the other one in just a minute. So it says this: on the eve of these talks, Iran took an extraordinary step that should alarm any serious observer. In a letter to the United Nations Secretary General and the International Atomic Energy Agency, Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi threatened to hide enriched uranium at secret locations if threats made by the Zionist fanatics persist. Iran would implement special measures for the protection of its nuclear facilities and materials, a thinly veiled threat to move its most sensitive materials beyond international monitoring. Israeli officials have shifted from quiet preparation to barely concede readiness. Mossad chief David Barnea and Strategic Affairs Minister Ron Dermer flew to Rome alongside Witkoff's talk, tuned to receive immediate briefings on any progress. Their presence accentuated Jerusalem's determination to understand every diplomatic nuance while military options remained active. U.S. intelligence has intercepted Israeli communications, signaling potential attack plans and observed tangible military movements, forward deployment of specialized munitions, completion of major Air Force exercises, and strike readiness indicators. As Defense Minister Israel Katz declared, Iran is more exposed than ever to strikes on its nuclear facilities. We have the opportunity to achieve our most important goal, to thwart and eliminate the existential threat. The operational reality is daunting, this article says. Any Israeli strike would require a week-long campaign targeting multiple sites: the Natanz enrichment complex, the deeply buried Fordow facility, Isfahan's uranium conversion plant, and suspected weaponization sites. Israel has methodically degraded Iran's deterrent capabilities. Hezbollah's rocket arsenal reportedly reduced by 80%. Iranian proxies and networks shattered. Hamas isolated after the Gaza war. As one Israeli security official assessed, Iran's regional allies lie in tatters. But Tehran's not sitting back and doing nothing. This was an article. There's a big thread on X about this, and you'll see this is Hezbollah, and then Hezbollah has in its grip South America. What it appears that Tehran has been doing is so that they don't lose the abilities of people that they've trained for a very long time, that they've been moving them to South America, particularly Venezuela. But that ought to concern us in America, because Hezbollah and Tehran say, death to Israel, death to America. So this is something that's very concerning. So back to this article about the from the Middle East Forum. Okay, here's another part of this that is kind of interesting. China's simulation role. What's China doing this? Well, it's involved. China's simulation role proved particularly instructive. Beijing positioned itself as both Iran's protector and the Gulf states' alternative security guarantor, ultimately downing an Israeli aircraft when conflict erupted. Now, this is again in the war game situation. This reflects current reality. China continues supplying Iran through sanctions, purchasing discounted oil, and positioning itself to benefit regardless of outcome. Recent U.S. Treasury sanctions revealed Chinese sodium percolate shipments to Iran's missile program through Bandar Abbas, the same port that suffered a mysterious explosion in April. Boom, it went up big time. I talked about that over the last couple of weeks. And China's moving forward. China's trying to become totally economically independent from the United States. Trump's attempt on sanctions is probably accelerating that. China, for example, I heard Dave Walsh yesterday. He was on Bannon's War Room. Dave Walsh is, I think, probably the leading practical energy expert on the planet. I would hope that he would become Secretary of Energy, but maybe it's better that he's not tied into the administration. But he said this: we have a major problem in the United States. I also heard somebody in the economic apparatus in the United States, I don't know if it was the Secretary of the Treasury, talking about the fact that, no, it was somebody else, it was a hedge fund guy. He said, U.S.'s path to success is complete energy independence and energy ability to generate power 24/7. China recognizes this. China is building, I believe they're opening 2 coal-burning power plants somewhere either every week or every other week. Because they know that solar and wind and battery aren't going to cut it. They're not on 24/7. So this economic person was advocating we need to build gas-powered plants. Trump signed a bunch of orders this week about nuclear power, which is great. But under the best of circumstances, it's a decade until nuclear power comes online. In the meantime, you have this increasing demand from the AI part of this, which, by the way, anything I talk about this week, I could do an hour or 2 on each one of those subjects. And so I am blessing you by not doing an hour or 2 on each one of those subjects. But they're all interconnected. So here's another part. This comes into the war game about Iran or Israel's maybe imminent attack on Iranian facilities. Russia similarly exploits the crisis for strategic gain. While avoiding direct military involvement, Moscow upgrades Iran's capabilities and threatens advanced S-400 air defense sales that would substantially complicate Israeli operations. Our simulations Russian team seized Arctic territories while others focused on the Gulf, classic strategic opportunism that mirrors Russian President Vladimir Putin's real-world approach. And I just mentioned to you what Dugin says, got a lot more that he wants to accomplish in Ukraine than he's already accomplished. Back to the simulation, President Trump's position cuts through diplomatic obfuscation. Zero enrichment or face consequences. This clarity, combined with implicit Israeli action if negotiations fails, represents sophisticated strategy disguised as simplicity. Yet Tehran's response has been escalation, not compromise. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps declared Israel would receive a devastating and decisive response to any attack, while Iran's foreign minister warned that Washington would be held legally responsible as a participant in any Israeli aggression. The fundamental problem remains structural. Iran views domestic enrichment as non-negotiable. Our war game demonstrated that non-kinetic tools, sanctions, cyber operations, intelligence activities work only when applied early with international support. Once Iran crosses nuclear threshold, these measures alone prove insufficient. A paradox emerged. When Israel contemplated strike seriously, Iran shifted from defense to urgent negotiation. Demonstrating willingness to use force sometimes provides the only impetus for genuine compromise. But look at what some of these things say. And Israel knows they're going to pay a price. The Houthis are going to ramp up their attacks, everybody else. Hezbollah may not be a problem, but Israel's continuing to attack places in Lebanon. And then you have to factor in Syria. Now they have a jihadist leader in Syria. So here's what this article says. Success requires more than strikes alone. Our simulation demonstrated that facilities rebuild, knowledge survives, and determination strengthens under attack without sustained pressure. Israel must drive the nail through nuclear facilities, while America must turn the screws on everything else. Complete financial isolation, continuous cyber degradation, comprehensive intelligence penetration, and diplomatic quarantine until Iran abandons enrichment entirely. And by the way, one of the phrases in there was up in the upper right-hand corner of that little window, knowledge survives. And so this is the problem, because even if Israel is successful in taking out and degrading all of their nuclear facilities this time, what is one thing they're not going to accomplish? They're not going to be able to accomplish getting rid of the knowledge that Iran has built up over the last 30 or 40 years in how to do uranium enrichment, weaponization of that, building of missiles and other technologies, unless you take out every single person that has knowledge. Now, Israel went in and amassed this unbelievable operation into a warehouse in Tehran and got all of their nuclear records. But it's very naive to think that that completely degraded Iran's capabilities. The knowledge is there. The knowledge is going to be there. So you go in and you take out the facilities, and they're Islamist. They take a view that it might take us 200 years to do this, but eventually we'll get back to it. And I just want to put this into the prophetic context of what we talk about. So even though the Iranian regime may go away, we don't know what's going to replace it. If you get rid of the mullahs, maybe they'll be replaced by the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps. And is that a bigger problem than the mullahs? Because they have the same religious ideology. So it's going to be a problem. Washington's strategic ambiguity while extending diplomatic hands while deploying B-2 bombers on Diego Garcia and transferring bunker buster bombs to Israel serves multiple purposes. It reassures Jerusalem, pressures Tehran, and maintains flexibility. Yet this ambiguity has limits. Israeli officials privately warn that absent breakthrough, they will strike unilaterally. And that's probably true. The multilateral, and this is kind of interesting too, the multilateral context that enabled past agreements has shattered. So we used to live in this world where America was sort of the controlling superpower, and we could kind of, for lack of a better term, run roughshod over everybody. But it says this, that process, that past agreements has shattered. Russia partners with Iran against Ukraine. China prioritizes displacing American influence over nonproliferation. Europe lacks leverage. I just mentioned that. They can't really muster a big force to fight right now. They're spending a lot of money. They're talking about spending trillions of euros on this, but it takes time, right? But what's the old saying? Rome wasn't built in a day, and the European army will not be built in a day either. Regional players hedge their bets. This leaves heavy lifting to Washington and Jerusalem, with Oman's mediation valuable, but ultimately unable to bridge fundamental differences. And then I'll read this. So the multilateral context that enabled past agreements has shattered. So we have a big problem. They conclude with this, and I went through this a lot because I think it's very important. It's an excellent article by Greg Roman. Every indicator points towards military action within days. Witkoff's Rome departure, intelligent reports of uranium relocation threats, degraded Iranian proxy networks, and Israeli military readiness converge toward one conclusion. Prime Minister Netanyahu, according to the Times of Israel, is waiting for the nuclear talks to collapse, and for the moment, Trump will be disappointed and open to giving him the go-ahead. That moment has effectively arrived. Iran's breakout timeline severely strains the utility of continued negotiation. Each round buys Tehran time while Jerusalem's patience evaporates. The phrase circulating in Israeli military circles is chillingly simple. It's now a matter of days, not weeks. I wish otherwise. I wish diplomacy alone could secure our interests in Israel's survival. But wishing accomplishes nothing against a regime that threatens annihilation while pursuing the means to achieve it. The world may very soon awaken to explosions over Iranian nuclear sites, a pivotal moment that will test Western resolve to prevent nuclear proliferation through sustained pressure combining Israeli military action with comprehensive American-led isolation. The alternative includes Iranian nuclear weapons, regional conflagration, and Chinese and Russian strategic gains at American expense. Sometimes inaction disguised as prudence proves most dangerous. This week tests that truth. May our leaders internalize these lessons before time expires, and may we possess the resolve to see through what must be done. And you think, I'm a downer, right? But that's a very sobering, realistic assessment of what's going on. In the context of that, though, I also want to bring this up because there's another article at Middle East Forum this week, and my reaction was, I love it when the think tanks catch up with me. Now, I'd say that with a little bit of ego, I'll admit that, and this is the big article. Iran's seemingly unstoppable birth slump. Iranians are not following the clerics' dictate to prop up the birth rate, which has been at sub-replacement levels since 1999. And there are some charts there, and you can see 2.1 is what the should be. So back in the 60s, they were there. Now they're approaching, right now, actual births in the last year may be under 1.0 fertility rate. You need 2.1, they're at 1.0. What does that mean? Well, if you need 2.1 and you're on 1.0, you're half of what you need to replace. Just keep the population level. So what does this mean? I don't think the mullahs are concerned about it because they talk about it and they're trying to change it. China's trying to change it. China's probably even worse. Japan's bad. And then I have a chart, I don't have it in my presentation today, all over Europe, the best country at fertility rate, no, you need 2.1, is, I believe, France at 1.6. Romania is like 0.9 or 0.8. This is not sustainable. And the world has never faced this. And China's been talking about turning it around. And maybe that's God's judgment. Okay, you mess around with the birth rate, you support abortion and everything, I'll show you. And your country will dissolve into nothingness if the Lord doesn't return for another 100 years. But we're sort of on the same track ourselves. Long before this latest birth milestone, Iran's fertility decline was already remarkable. Iran entered sub-replacement fertility around the year 1999 and has remained stubbornly tethered to it ever since. They had a slight bump around the time of the Charlie Vector 019er pandemic, but it continues to go down and it's even worse. At the conclusion, this article says this. Oh, there it is. At the bottom, Iran's fertility patterns reflected secular value, Europe's fertility patterns reflected secular values. It is basically a post-Christian zone. Is a secular society likewise hiding beneath Iran's religious dictatorship? Could be. Maybe people are giving up. But do you think the mullahs are going to? The mullahs may say we better act now to preserve what we want to in terms of an Islamic republic. It's very interesting. Melanie Phillips has a great article. You can go to the Times of London and find this. Team Trump risks fatally misunderstanding Iran. And I agree with her. I don't. I mean, how many years have we been negotiating with Iran on this issue? Yeah, forever. And all of our administrations have been very pro-Iranian in how they've approached this, and it's terrible. So here's what she said. Traveling in America, I've encountered 3 different political groups. There are dyed-in-the-wool Donald Trump supporters who won't tolerate any criticism of their hero who can do no wrong. Who can do no wrong. There are perpetually apoplectic never-Trumpers who won't tolerate any praise for the archfiend in the White House who could do nothing right. And there are those who suppress their doubts about Trump to vote for him because they loathed and feared the Democratic Party. And she's right. So there's this isolationist wing in the party. The guy who heads up Memory has been talking about the problem of Qatar. I mean, that's really, I believe, the main reason that he formed Memory, the Middle East Media Research Institute, was to translate things that are coming out of Qatar because he saw it as such a problem. He's an Israeli, and he's right. This is a huge, huge problem. Woke education is going strong even in middle America. Everybody's trying to get rid of it. I have some comments at the end about a problem that I see that I've talked about before. We have things with AI, kamikaze drones, Taiwan strengthens arsenal with drones. I mean, the talk about war and defense and offensive capabilities is everywhere that you look. And then in Washington, D.C. the other night, these two young Jewish Messianic believers were slaughtered in downtown Washington, D.C., about a mile from the White House. They were at a meeting at the Jewish Museum. They came out. Guy approached him. He's a radical jihadist, and he shot them. The young lady, she was from Oklahoma or Kansas. She survived the initial assault, and she tried to crawl away, and the guy reloaded and shot her in the back. I don't know how many times they were shot, killed her. They were romantically involved, and the word is that he was from Israel. I have friends who know he's quite well known in the Messianic Jewish community there, served in the IDF, loved Israel, and was serving in the diplomatic corps, talking about Middle East issues, advising the Israeli ambassador to the U.S. Just what I hear is a great couple. He was going to propose to her next week. He had bought a ring, and he was going to do it in Jerusalem next week when they were in Jerusalem. And they're going to have a big party, and his friends knew about it, and everybody was happy about it. And now both lives are cut short by this radical jihadist that killed them. It is a big problem. That came a couple days after Canada, the UK, and France issued a statement that Israel has to stop everything in Gaza. It's stunning that they would want Israel to do this. Hang on a second here. Let me have here's the statement that they issued the other day on the right. Joint statement from the leaders of the United Kingdom, France and Canada on the situation in Gaza and the West Bank. And they're just saying, you got to stop. This is Israel. You can't do this. You can't continue this. And Israel's like, we're just defending ourselves. Now, understand that what's happening is that there's big meeting coming up. I told you in the next few weeks, there's a lot going on. We're going to have a big meeting at the UN in June, I think June 16th, 17th, and they're already having preliminary meetings about this. They had one at the UN this week. It's the joint committee to establish a two-state solution in Israel and Palestine. And they're pushing forward, even though nobody in Israel wants this. And so we try to fit this into our different prophetic paradigms, and we have this thing in Daniel 9:27, the confirmation of a covenant. It means gavor, covenant, makes strong or creates with force. I and others have suggested that we consider that to be, excuse me a second, that we should look at this in the context of maybe, I said this for a very long time, even back in 2016, after the 2016 election, when our government, I hate to use the term my government, but it was my government, did not veto Resolution 2334. And so the UN is pushing all these resolutions together, 2334 and all these other ones about creating a separate Palestinian state. And so the question is, how does this come about? Is it going to be shoved down Israel's throat? That's kind of my conclusion. Israel doesn't want it. Nobody in Israel wants it. I think if you did a poll in Israel, it'd be 90% would say no two-state solution. But that doesn't matter to the people running the UN, and they will do everything in their world. So what we've watched over the last years with sanctions on Russia, sanctions on China, these treasury sanctions everywhere, taking people out of the SWIFT banking system and that type of thing. While people thought this was a great idea and a smart thing to do, the problem is everybody learned from that. So now everybody thinks they can sanction. So what are these people going to do at the UN in the next few weeks? Are they going to sanction Israel, cut Israel off from trade, cut Israel off from weapons, cut Israel off from materials needed to make weapons? It's probably coming, and you need to understand that somewhere between 90 and 150 countries in the world agree with this approach. So whether Israel agrees to it or not, it may be shoved down their throat. Now, maybe they'll offer Israel a carrot. We'll let you build a temple if you accept this. I don't know. I'm just saying is everything is on the table right now. We don't know exactly how this is going to play out. So in the context of that, anti-Israel stuff coming from these governments in Canada, UK, and France taking the lead, issuing this big statement last week. These two young Israeli Jewish Messianic believers were gunned down in Washington, D.C., in our nation's capital, about 1 mile from the White House. This is an incredibly significant thing that just happened. So the other day here's Benjamin Netanyahu gave a statement. I'll play part of it. This might run 7 minutes, but I think it's very important to listen to what he has to say.
Last night in Washington, something horrific happened. A brutal terrorist shot in cold blood a young, beautiful couple, Yaron Lishinsky and Sarah Milgram. Yaron had just bought an engagement ring for Sarah. He was planning to give it to her in Jerusalem next week. They were planning to start a new and happy life together. Well, that tragically did not happen. Yaron and Sarah weren't the victims of a random crime. The terrorist who cruelly gunned them down did so for one reason and one reason alone. He wanted to kill Jews. And as he was taken away, he chanted, "Free Palestine." This is exactly the same chant we heard on October 7th. On that day, thousands of terrorists stormed into Israel from Gaza. They beheaded men, they raped women, they burned babies alive, they butchered 1,200 innocent people and took 251 innocent people hostage to the dungeons of Gaza. A short time afterwards, Chancellor Scholz of Germany visited Israel. And after he saw the horrors, he said to me, "These Hamas terrorists are exactly like the Nazis." He was right. And if they could get away with it, these Hamas terrorists would have slaughtered every last Jew on earth. For these neo-Nazis, Free Palestine is just today's version of Heil Hitler. They don't want a Palestinian state. They want to destroy the Jewish state. They want to annihilate the Jewish people who've been in the land of Israel for 3,500 years. I could never understand how this simple truth evades the leaders of France, Britain, Canada, and others. They're now proposing to establish a Palestinian state and reward these murderers with the ultimate prize. Well, for 18 years, we had a de facto Palestinian state. It's called Gaza. And what did we get? Peace? No. We got the most savage slaughter of Jews since the Holocaust. You won't be surprised to learn that Hamas thanked President Macron and Prime Minister Starmer and Carney for demanding that Israel end its war in Gaza immediately. Hamas was right to thank them, because by issuing their demand, replete with a threat of sanctions against Israel, not Hamas, these three leaders effectively said they want Hamas to remain in power. They want Israel to stand down and accept that Hamas's army of mass murderers will survive, rebuild, and repeat the October 7th massacre again and again and again, because that's what Hamas has vowed to do. I say to President Macron, Prime Minister Carney, and Prime Minister Starmer, when mass murderers, rapists, baby killers and kidnappers, thank you. You're on the wrong side of justice. You're on the wrong side of humanity. And you're on the wrong side of history. Now, these leaders may think that they're advancing peace. They're not. They're emboldening Hamas to continue fighting forever. And they give them hope to establish a second Palestinian state, from which Hamas will again seek to destroy the Jewish state. And mind you, it's not going to be a state free of Hamas. When you establish a Palestinian state, we've seen it. The radicals take over. Iran sends them in and they take over. So don't give us this talk. It'll be a peaceful Palestinian state. It won't be. But the hypocrisy doesn't stop there. These and other leaders have bought into Hamas's propaganda that says Israel is starving Palestinian children. And not only is Hamas putting out this lie, a few days ago, a top UN official said that 14,000 Palestinian babies would die in 48 hours. You see, many international institutions are complicit in spreading this lie. The press repeats it, the mob believed it, and a young couple is then brutally gunned down in Washington. So here are the facts. Since October 7th, Israel has sent 92,000 aid trucks into Gaza. That's right, 92,000 aid trucks. That includes 1.8 million tons of aid. 1.8 million tons of aid. More than enough food to feed everyone in Gaza. Yet as we had let the aid come in, Hamas stole it. They took a huge chunk for themselves. The rest they sold at exorbitant prices to the Palestinian population. And then they used the money they stole to recruit new terrorists to continue their war against Israel. Our goal from the start was to get food to Palestinian civilians, not to Palestinian terrorists. So we consulted with our American allies. What do we do to prevent Hamas from looting the aid? Well, together we devised a mechanism to achieve this goal. American companies will distribute the food directly to Palestinian families. They'll do so in safe zone secured by our military. And this will allow us to complete our goal of destroying Hamas while enabling aid to reach the civilian population. We'll complete the construction of the first distribution zones in the coming days. Ultimately, we intend to have large safe zones in the south of Gaza. And the Palestinian population will move there for their own safety while we conduct combat in other zones and receive humanitarian aid there without Hamas interference. In the meantime, we authorized letting trucks enter Gaza to provide for immediate needs. Yesterday, I think more than 100 trucks went in. More will come in today. I tell you this, no army in the world has ever gone to such lengths to provide aid to the civilian population in the midst of intense combat.
And he's right. So what happened? So the regimes in the Middle East generally have a main newspaper. So, for example, by the way, this week, Erdogan in Turkey, we've talked about him and his penchant and what he says and the posters and things that he uses and what he says about Israel and his goal being what the goal of the Turkish government is to establish an Islamic caliphate, not necessarily a Turkish caliphate, but a caliphate throughout the Middle East. And he's been pursuing that goal for some time. It was announced this week that he may not be seeking re-election. So I'm still trying to find out if that's a head fake or if that's actually true or not. There's talk about amending the Constitution yet again in Turkey, which has happened a couple times to allow him to remain in office. Because I think he was the prime minister for a while. Then he said, well, prime minister had term limits, so they put in a long term for presidential office, and now he's president, so who knows? That was in Yeni's effect this week. And then this is Israel, or Kayan newspaper in Iran. It's one of the main mouthpiece newspapers for the Iranian regime. And here is a front page article about this Palestinian terrorist. I can't remember where he's from. I think he's from Chicago. Isn't that interesting? And there's reports that his parents were at His father was at Barack Obama's residence in Washington within the last few months for a couple-hour meeting. I'm sure it's just a coincidence. I think they were watching basketball or something. But so here's this article in Cayenne newspaper. By the way, if you go to the Cayenne English website, this newspaper is not there. So if you dig around, it took me a while. I dug around. I got the Persian version. In fact, I thought I had a separate slide for this. This is what the Persian version looks like. And you can see that, there's the guy very prominently there. And essentially, it's heaping praise on this guy for what he did in this really wonderful operation. The headlines are this: Revenge against Israel in the heart of America killed a young American Zionist diplomat. And then, by the way, over here are the other article on the other side: Unprecedented global unity against the Zionist regime. 80 countries condemn Israel's crimes. We have to put everything in the context of what everybody thinks, whether they're right or wrong. So this article went through and praised the operation that this kid did, and immediately on social media, people were saying, "Oh, this was clearly done by the Israeli Mossad to get sympathy for Israel." It was a false flag. I mean, we should have when something like this happens, we should have sort of what do you select in the pool is how many seconds it takes for somebody to make this claim. And it was within minutes. It was all over social media. And the people that don't like Israel, the names of these people, I talk about them a lot. They were right out there saying, well, look at what Israel's doing in Gaza, and what do you expect? Well, what I expect is that when you're in the midst of a war, you're allowed to fight a war. You don't have to fight with these ridiculous rules. So on Fox, I'm going to play this. This is about 6 minutes. I may end with this. I have one other comment, but on Fox News the other morning, they asked Mark Levin about this. And Mark Levin, if you know, he is an attorney. He's not he said, I'm an attorney, not a diplomat. And he uses the D word a couple times in here. So if you have sensitive ears, turn it off now. Come back next week. I'm going to play this because I agree with everything he says. He's right. We have a massive problem. So they asked him on Fox News the other morning, Mark, what do you think about what happened in D.C. last night? Here's what he said.
Mark Levin is with us now, host of this great show over the weekend. Mark, your thought about what we just witnessed hours ago.
Well, my thought is this. I'm not a rabbi and I'm not a diplomat, so I'll call it as I see it. The West is weak. They're weak against this fusion of these Marxists and these Islamists. They're spending hundreds of billions of dollars in our country and throughout Europe. Qatar is number one. Communist China is number two. That's not a mistake. That's not a coincidence. They're trying to destroy us from within. President Trump talks about the enemy within. This is the enemy within. We see it. There's a Kristallnacht taking place in our country every day and throughout Europe every day. Jews are not safe in every capital in Europe, and now they're not safe in our capital. Now, we always are sort of behind Europe in its decline over a period of years. We need to learn and see what's taking place. This isn't about free speech, so the radical libertarians, in the face of this onslaught, would have us commit suicide. This is being funded by Qatar and other countries. There's a funding network. There are more Islamist front groups in this country, terrorist front groups in this country. They multiply like rabbits. Congress is not doing enough to stop this. I know the administration is doing yeoman's work, unlike the prior administration. This is what happens when you have open borders and unfettered and unvetted immigration, particularly from the Middle East. Our courts are not capable by ideological and administrative processes to deal with. In fact, they are obstructing efforts by this administration to deport the enemy, and they are the enemy. They're not an adversary. They're not a bunch of punks just with big mouths. They're marching through the streets like no Nazis ever have, like no Klansmen ever have in our country, calling for the destruction of the United States of America, the overthrow of the West, burning the American flag, chasing Jewish students on college campuses, threatening elderly Jews who hold signs on the streets peacefully, attacking our synagogues. Now, I say this to my fellow Americans. Is this what we want? Is this who we are? Because the ruling class is letting us down. Seal the damn borders, which is what President Trump is doing. Stop every damn penny coming into this country from these terrorist states. I don't care if they put smiles on their faces and hold seminars or whatever the hell they're doing. They're the enemy. They're the enemy. They funded 9/11. 9/11 wasn't even about Jews or Israel. It's about us. They killed over 2,000 of our people. Let the Israelis win their war against Hamas. Stop holding them back. They killed over 1,200 of their people in the most heinous ways, so horrific that the videos haven't been released on any single cable or network television show. That's how horrible it is. If you want to act like a subhuman, you need to be treated like a subhuman. These terrorist organizations, they don't think like we do. They don't think like the West. They see weakness because there is weakness. They've all but destroyed our Ivy League schools, and they're working now in K through 12. What are we going to do? Yell the First Amendment? Free speech? What are we going to do? Allow them to keep pouring money into our country, buying sporting events, buying politicians, buying businesses, and then pretend when they put smiles on their faces and they're driving around in their Mercedes-Benz that they aren't the terrorists that they are? How many more reports have to be published about the amount of money that's being poured into this country by these terrorist states like Qatar, like Iran? We can allow Iran to get a nuclear weapon? The president says no. Isn't it time that the entire nation says no, rather than a debate on whether we can manage a nuclearized Iran? They want to destroy us. They've tried to assassinate our president. How many more signals do they need to send us? What else do they need to do? They are eating away at our country from within. Europe has basically been conquered. We need to put our foot down. These two precious human beings executed in cold blood. And let me tell you something, Brian. In 3 days, we'll be on to the next subject. Never even think about them again. They took hostages. They raped them. They murdered them. They starved them. They tortured them. They executed them. They're still in, 20 of them, in tunnels in Gaza. And the Israelis are being told to back off. Our media uses Hamas statistics, Hamas lies, to turn the world against the Jews in Israel and against the United States, to affect public opinion. The same American media that lied about Biden lie about these terrorist regimes and what's taking place in Gaza. And our Congress, the Bernie Sanders, the Talibs, the Omars, the AOCs, they have a lot to answer for with this Marxist Islamist crap. And the fact of the matter is, they boycott the leader of Israel, Netanyahu, because they hate Israel. They say, oh, we don't mind Israel. It's Zionism we oppose. Zionism is the establishment of the state of Israel. It's the only indigenous people on the face of the earth that are now allowed to be indigenous. So we have to have a discussion in this country, but I'm not a rabbi and I'm not a diplomat. So I'll pray and I'll talk, but it's time for action.
So, Mark, I do find there's a little ignorance when it comes to some of the people that are in the middle of the street, too. They're getting away with it because they say free Palestine. But now you have the person that committed this act saying free Palestine as well. But they've been marching in the middle of the street with Hamas flags. They have been denying October the 7th the whole time. And people think they're just dumb kids. We got a report that's from the hostages that were released that they were communicating with the college campuses. It's like a sleeper cell that's right in front of us, and we don't seem to be paying attention to it.
October 7 attacks, those communications were taking place.
And like this guy, Khalil, isn't it funny that Democrats are defending him? Every disgusting reprobate. They circle the wagons to defend them. The Constitution that they've been trashed and attacked. The framers who wrote it, they attacked and trashed. Now they wave it around like there's some First Amendment right to be a mouthpiece and a leader for a front group that seeks to overthrow our colleges and destroy our learning. The West is under attack. This is a war against the West. People need to understand the mentality that we're up against, whether it's the Marxists or the Islamists. They have a joint venture to take out Europe and now the United States from within. Just as Reagan destroyed the Soviet Union without firing a shot, they intend to destroy the United States without firing a shot. They're doing a hell of a good job of it. Look at the rot in our colleges and universities. We scream about the First Amendment and free speech. We don't even have academic freedom. The faculty hires the faculty. They hire people of the same ideology, the same mentality. We're brainwashing our children. We taxpayers are paying for this. We parents are paying the tuition for this. We have a say in this. This isn't about free speech. This isn't about civil liberty. This is about whether we survive as a free nation. And it is happening now. Donald Trump is fighting it as best as he can. The Democrats are basically the umbrella for all these reprobates and malcontents and so forth and so on. They have them within their own midst. And we have some, I don't even say we, they're not Republicans, some of these phony isolationists who have their own platforms and so forth out there. Israel's going to drag us into a war. We're in a damn war. Don't you understand? They're in our country right now. They want to kill us. They want to take down our towers. They're destroying our universities. It's not a matter of Israel dragging anybody into anything. This is a war on London. It's a war on Paris. It's a war on Amsterdam. It's a war on Washington and New York. And it's happening in front of us right now. Whether the media wants to report it fully or not, it is taking place right now.
Well, I agree with that. And I mean, so we just went through this whole thing with Biden. Okay? This whole narrative, he was okay, he was fine, is collapsing. Here's 1 minute from Victor Davis Hanson talking about just, Jake Tapper released a book this week, and he was attacking Trump's daughter-in-law when she said that Biden had obvious cognitive decline. He said, he just had a stutter. You're making fun of somebody who has a stutter. Now he's got a book saying Laura Trump was right. Everybody on the right was right. Here's Victor Davis Hanson.
There's a book that came out recently by Jake Tapper of CNN and Axios, Alex Thompson, called Original Sin. It's about the cover-up decline of Joe Biden and the disastrous choice of him choosing to run in 2024 until he was forcibly ejected from the ticket. We all have problems with this, and it's essentially Jake Tapper. It's a co-authored book, but it's Jake Tapper. Jake Tapper is a CNN grandee, 7-figure salary, kind of an iconic figure in this left-wing media outlet. But my point is this: for the last 4 years, again and again and again, if anybody questioned the obvious mental decline of Joe Biden, his cognitive difficulties, Jake Tapper, and went on CNN, Jake Tapper tore them apart. The locus classicus was Laura Trump, who said that he's obviously as early as 2020 in decline, and he suggested that she was berating him for a childhood stutter, which was absolutely ridiculous.
So, anyway, I want to speak about this. I spoke about this when President Trump took office. He was signing executive orders. One of those executive orders created a faith office. At the time, you can probably go back and look at the update I did just after the election. I said at the time, I think this is a huge mistake. You can issue executive orders, stop discrimination against Christians and lawfare against Christians and all that. I support that 100%. I said then the faith office was a bad idea. Why? Because everybody and their brother is going to come into this faith office. And now we're seeing all this ecumenical people coming in, Muslims and the Islamic prayers in the White House again. We criticized it before. We should be criticizing it now. And then a few weeks ago, the head of the faith office, Paula White, went to the World, I think it's called the World Peace Summit in Korea, I believe it was in Korea, and spoke. This is sponsored by the Moonies. the wife of Sun Myung Moon, the mother. She considered herself the holy mother, or the human mother, or mother of God, or some ridiculous thing. Now, I'm going to play just a short clip of her speaking at this conference. And this is the person who's heading the White House Faith Office. So my advice, President Trump, shut it down tomorrow. This cannot go on. This is not honoring to the Lord. Here we go.
That he has appointed to make sure that people of all faiths are represented. In just a month and a half, we have had over 1,000 faith leaders in the White House Faith Office for shaping policy, doing faith diplomacy, iftar dinner, negotiation with religious liberty. Somebody's calling on someone else's phone. Negotiation. Here you go. Negotiations with people around the world with religious liberty, and making sure that people of all faith are protected. I'm excited to be back here, as I have been attending several world summits before, and I am always moved by the way this summit emphasizes the role of faith in partnership with world leaders and the elected people of state and parliamentaries. I understand, in addition to prominent world leaders, that there are speakers of parliament from over 40 nations that are here. I'm deeply honored to stand before you today. Seoul in South Korea is very special and a part of my life and a part of my heart. You've not only been in my prayers, but I have been here for several decades, believing God with you and standing in my capacity as a pastor and as a spiritual leader in the United States. This year, we commemorate the 80th anniversary of the founding of the United Nations, an organization that rose from the ashes to champion peace, human rights.
Okay, look, I can only tolerate so much of this. This is not good. This is a huge mistake. It needs to be rectified. It needs to be rectified immediately. By the way, there's a... in response to, oh, here it is, from Jerusalem Post this morning. Pro-Palestinian influencer backs off killing of Israelis in D.C. He put up a 10-minute video. Kill them. Kill them all in D.C. Kill all of the Jews. His parents are Mormon. This guy. He attends The Ohio State University. Watch your back when you're out there. So we have big problems, and I pray that people will stand up and correct them. So let's pray, and we'll update later. Lord, thanks so much for your word. Pray that you'll help us take to heart the things we learned today. Pray we'll hold our leaders accountable and speak the truth to them, and that you will help us to or protect us from some really bad decisions. We pray that you'll watch over us. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem. Give us opportunities to share the gospel. Pray for the families of this young couple that was murdered in D.C. Pray that you'll comfort them. Pray that we use all of this to your glory. In Jesus' name, amen.